Hi, I'm Garth McKenzie from traderscorner.co.za, and this is your weekly look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indices. So as always, I start with a look at the daily chart of the S&P 500 to see what's going on there, and then we'll zoom in onto the hourly chart after that. So the daily chart here shows you that this market is still generally in a nice, steady rising trend. That large triangle pattern that played out in the final quarter of 2020 is still very much intact, and the higher target is still intact. You can see that triangle pattern labeled there with labels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as is always the case with the triangle pattern, it typically breaks out on the fifth wave. And if that's what happens, as is the case here, then generally you can be fairly confident that the target will be met. Now, in this case, the target is 38.50, so not that far up from where the market is currently. There's an upward channel that you can see that's been intact since late November, and the lower end of that channel comes in at about 37.50. The market did trade down to that level on Friday before the long weekend holiday in the US. At this point in time, the futures market are indicating a slightly stronger open for the S&P 500 when trade gets underway today. So for all intents and purposes, for now, it looks as if that upward channel is still intact, and that higher target of 38.50 is still potentially achievable. If we then take a look at the hourly chart of the S&P 500, here you can see the more relevant levels on a shorter term basis. So starting at the bottom there, 37.50 is the support level, as I mentioned on the previous daily chart. You can see the significance of that 37.50 support on this hourly chart. Then some resistance is at 37.90. The market would need to overcome that 37.90 area to invalidate the break to the downside that occurred on Friday last week. And if that can occur, if the market can get up above 37.90 and above 3800, then it's quite possible we see a move back up to the prior high, which is at 38.20. And if the 38.20 level is taken out to the upside, well, then that opens further gains into new all-time high territory for the market. And then obviously that larger 38.50 target off the daily chart comes into play. Let's then take a look at the NASDAQ 100. We start with a look at the daily chart of the NASDAQ. Here again, you can see that large triangular pattern that occurred in the last quarter of 2020, once again labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the market broke out on the fifth wave, and it's continued higher since then. So pretty much a textbook triangle pattern here, and that triangle pattern points up to a target of 13,800. Now, over the last 6 weeks or so, you can see there is an upward channel that's evident, and the market has found support each time it's pulled back into the bottom of that channel. That support right now comes in at around 12,800. The market did trade towards that area on Friday last week, and it looks as if the futures are pointing to a slightly stronger open when trade gets underway today. So overall, this is still a pretty bullish chart setup. My only slight reservation is that there is negative divergence becoming evident there on the RSI at the top of the chart, and then also on the stochastic oscillator at the bottom of the chart. And that negative divergence can suggest that the upward momentum is slowing somewhat. But for the time being, I think we give price action the benefit of the doubt here. And for the moment, whilst that upward channel is still intact, the price action is still pretty positive, and the higher target can still be justified. Let's then take a look at the last chart, and this is the NASDAQ hourly chart, and it's simply zooming in on the recent trading activity on the NASDAQ a little bit more carefully. And there you can see again that upward sloping channel that I alluded to on the previous chart, still very much intact. The lower support boundary there comes in at 12,800, and if that were to break, then there's some more lateral support at 12,600. As I said, the futures market is pointing to a stronger start when trade gets underway today. So if this NASDAQ can get up and ultimately get up above 13,000 again, then I think the game is still on for a higher target, and that higher target being 13,800 that I mentioned on the daily chart. So overall, still a pretty bullish picture, generally speaking here. And whilst those upward channels are intact, we've got to stay bullish on these markets. That's all I've got for you this week. I'll be back again next week with another look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ.